You know, when we think about the American Civil War, it's so easy to see it as one story, and then to see Reconstruction, the period that came after, as this totally separate thing. But they aren't. They're really just two acts of the exact same drama, this long, continuous struggle over what America was actually going to be. So today, that's what we're going to do. We're going to connect the dots from the very first shots fired to the final smoky backroom deals that would shape the country for the next 100 years.
So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the nation right on the brink, a house divided. Then we'll dive into how this war became so unbelievably brutal so quickly. From there, we'll cover the Union's hard-won victory, and then pivot to the enormous task of rebuilding a broken nation. And finally, we'll look at the second battle that began right after the war, the battle for freedom, and ask a tough question. Why was this revolution left unfinished?
Okay, so picture this. It's 1861. Cannons are firing on Fort Sumter. The country is officially splitting apart. The lines are drawn. But this was never going to be an even fight. Each side was walking onto the battlefield with a totally different set of advantages and a totally different set of problems.
And this right here really lays it out. I mean, look at this. On paper, you'd think the North has this in the bag, right? They had more people, way more factories, all the money, and a navy that controlled the seas. But, and this is a big but, the South had some serious advantages of its own. They were fighting on their home turf, which is always a huge plus. Their morale, at least at the beginning, was through the roof, and their culture had produced some of the most brilliant military officers of the time. So the North's first big idea, it wasn't the all-out bloody invasion we might imagine. It was a strategy from General Winfield Scott called the Anaconda Plan. And yeah, it's pretty much what it sounds like. The idea was to use the Union Navy to blockade the entire southern coastline and then seize control of the Mississippi River. Basically, to wrap around the Confederacy like a giant snake and just squeeze its economy until it tapped out. The hope was to win with as little bloodshed as possible.
Well, that hope for a quick, maybe even a clean war? Yeah, that didn't last long. Not at all. It just evaporated. What happened was you had these old-school battle tactics crashing headfirst into brand-new, deadly industrial-age weapons. And the results? Absolute slaughterhouses, on a scale that nobody could have possibly imagined.
Just look at this number for a second. 23,000. That is the number of men killed, wounded, or missing after just 2 days of fighting at the Battle of Shiloh early in the war. Let that sink in. At one point in the battle, something like 7,000 men fell in just 20 minutes. This was not some gentleman's war, it was an industrial meat grinder. And if that number wasn't enough, this chart just says it all. We're talking about the Battle of Antietam, the single bloodiest day in all of American history. The casualties from that one single day were more than the total casualties from the entire War of 1812 and the war with Mexico combined. It was a level of carnage that was truly unimaginable for the people living through it. So with these unbelievable casualty numbers piling up, both sides had to start drafting soldiers. But here's the thing, it was anything but fair. It's where that bitter phrase comes from, a rich man's war and a poor man's fight. In the North, if you got drafted, you could pay $300, which was a fortune back then, to hire someone to go in your place. And in the South, they passed something called the 20 Negro Law, which meant if your family owned 20 or more enslaved people, you were exempt. This created massive, massive resentment on both sides. So right in the middle of all this chaos, Abraham Lincoln makes an absolute game-changing move. Now, we often think of the Emancipation Proclamation as this purely moral act, and it was, but it was also a brilliant piece of strategy. First, it satisfied the hardliners in his own party, the radical Republicans, who were demanding abolition. Second, it totally reframed the war as a fight for freedom, which really boosted sagging morale in the North. And finally, and this is huge, it made it practically impossible for anti-slavery countries like Britain and France to even think about supporting the Confederacy. So the proclamation changes the whole why of the war, but the brutal day-to-day fighting, that just kept grinding on. The road to victory was still a long way off, and it was about to lead to a speech that would redefine America, and then an act of violence that would throw the entire nation into chaos. And then you have Gettysburg. After this unbelievably bloody, pivotal battle, Lincoln gets up to give a speech. It's barely 2 minutes long, just 269 words. And you know what? At the time, nobody really thought much of it. But then, people started to read it in the newspapers, and those words, they just capture the nation's imagination. They transform the war from just preserving the old country into a fight for a new birth of freedom, giving a whole new purpose to a public that was just exhausted by the war.
As the end of the war finally started to feel possible, General William Tecumseh Sherman decided to finish it, and he unleashed a whole new, brutal kind of war. His famous March to the Sea wasn't just about winning battles. It was about crushing the South's will to fight. His army just cut loose from its supply lines, lived off the land, and carved a 60-mile-wide path of destruction all the way through Georgia, tearing up railroads, burning cities like Atlanta. The goal was simple and brutal: make war so terrible, so personal for the Southern people that they would never, ever try it again.
The war is over. The Union has won. And then, just days later, disaster. And what's so wild is that Lincoln's assassination wasn't just John Wilkes Booth acting alone. It was a full-blown conspiracy to wipe out the entire leadership of the U.S. government. Booth succeeded, but another attacker went after the Secretary of State, William Seward, and nearly killed him. A third man was supposed to kill the vice president, Andrew Johnson, but he just lost his nerve at the last minute. Just like that, the nation had won the war, but lost its leader at the exact moment he was needed most. The cannons have gone silent. The fighting's over. But in a lot of ways, the hardest part was just beginning. I mean, how do you even start to put a country back together after it's literally torn itself in two? That was the giant, messy question at the heart of Reconstruction.
You really can't overstate how big this challenge was. The South wasn't just defeated, it was obliterated. Major cities were just rubble. Their banks had failed, their currency was worthless, their farms and railroads were crippled. And here's the economic earthquake. Their entire system was built on a $2 billion investment in enslaved people. And overnight, poof, it was gone. The task ahead was just monumental. Right away, a massive fight breaks out over how to actually do this rebuilding. On one side, you've got the presidential plan, first from Lincoln and then from Andrew Johnson. It was a much softer approach. Their 10% plan basically said a state could come back into the Union once just 10% of its voters swore an oath of loyalty. But on the other side, you have Congress, led by a group called the Radical Republicans, and they looked at that and said, no way, this is way too soft. Their plan demanded 50% of voters take the oath and wanted much stronger protections for the newly freed slaves. This was the start of a huge power struggle. And this is maybe the most important takeaway here. The war didn't really end at Appomattox. It just changed locations. The conflict moved from the battlefields to the state houses and the halls of Congress. And the central fight was now about what freedom would actually mean for 4 million African Americans. Almost immediately, in this incredible act of defiance, Southern states started passing these laws called the Black Codes. And let's be clear about what these were. They were designed to control the labor of freedmen and basically restore the old racial hierarchy, just without the word slavery. They kept Black people from voting, from serving on juries, even from renting land. For a lot of people up north, this was infuriating. It looked like the South was trying to win the peace after losing the war. Well, Congress was absolutely enraged by this, and they fired back with 3 of the most powerful, most important amendments in the history of the Constitution. In just 5 years, the whole foundation of the country changed. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery for good. The 14th granted citizenship and promised equal protection of the laws to everyone. And the 15th said you couldn't deny someone the right to vote based on their race. It was a constitutional revolution. But here's the thing. You can write all the laws you want. Making them a reality on the ground, that's a different story. And that's when you see this violent backlash just explode across the South, led by secret organizations like the Ku Klux Klan. Their goal was brutally simple: use fraud, terror, and violence to restore white supremacy and destroy the Republican Party in the South. The federal government fought back, passing the Force Acts and sending troops, but it was like trying to put out 1,000 little fires at once. But this period of really intense federal action, of trying to remake society from the top down, it couldn't last forever. By the 1870s, frankly, a lot of people in the North were getting tired of it all. The political will was fading, and a new political order was taking over in the South, one that was determined to end Reconstruction. So, to get why it all ended, you gotta know the players on the field. You had carpetbaggers. That was the derogatory term for Northerners who moved south. Some wanted to help, others wanted to get rich. Then you had scalawags, another insult, for the white Southerners who actually joined the Republican Party. And both of those groups were hated by the Redeemers. These were the old-school Southern Democrats who were fighting to redeem the South from Republican control and bring back the old ways. And it all just ends. Not with a bang, but with a quiet backroom political deal. There was this crazy disputed presidential election in 1876. Nobody knew who won, so they cut a deal, what we now call the Compromise of 1877. The Republicans get the White House for their guy, Rutherford B. Hayes, and the price? The Democrats get the South back. Hayes agrees to pull the last of the federal troops out of the southern states. And just like that, with the Army gone, the whole federal project of Reconstruction was over.
And that brings us right back to the central question of this whole story. The laws were on the books. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were in the Constitution. They were permanent. But without anyone there to enforce them, the promise of those amendments, the promise of equality, it would basically lie dormant for almost another 100 years. So it forces you to ask, was that great, bloody, transformative revolution ever really finished? Or is it still going on today?